Public Awareness Subcommittee. So again, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Opine Dine, a free 14-session virtual panel series brought to you by the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force's Public Awareness Subcommittee. My name is Liz Kimball, and I'll be the moderator tonight. I'm the Survivor Initiatives Manager with Turnaround, and I am especially honored to be here tonight guiding our conversation. Before we dive into our topic tonight, I just want to go through some housekeeping items. This session is being recorded for the first 55 minutes so that it can be shared with those who are unable to attend live. If you prefer to not be on the recording, please keep your camera off and avoid unmuting during the recorded portion. The recording will end for the audience Q&A, so you're able to ask questions freely in the final portion without being recorded. We ask that you please keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking. The chat option is open throughout the whole session, so feel free to introduce yourself, share resources, and submit questions for our panelists. We will be reading them at the end. Our chat manager, Mac Bowles, will be collecting the questions and surfacing them during the audience Q&A portion, beginning around 6:55 p.m. If you experience any technical difficulties, try leaving and rejoining the meeting or send a message in the chat and we'll do our best to assist. If at any point during tonight's conversation feels difficult or activating, please know that support is available. The National Human Trafficking Hotline is 1-888-373-7888, and the crisis text line is text HOME to 233-733, and that will be put in the chat as well. We encourage engagement throughout the panel. Feel free to use the chat and share thoughts, resources, and respond to any discussion prompts. We simply ask that all comments remain respectful, on topic, and considerate of the diverse experiences and perspectives of everyone participating. The Opine Dine series was created as a way to find innovative and engaging opportunities to educate our communities about human trafficking and the intersections of vulnerability and exploitation. Since our first session earlier this summer, we have explored a wide range of topics and learned about many incredible resources available throughout Maryland. Tonight, we are joined by an incredible group of leaders from organizations across Maryland that are working every day to advance accessibility, inclusion, and support for individuals with disabilities and their families. Each of our panelists represents a different perspective, from systems change and public policy to community collaboration, victim services, communication access, and statewide accessibility initiatives. Together, they help create a more inclusive community to improve across to services for Marylanders with disabilities. My hope is that tonight's conversation not only helps us better understand the intersection of disability and human trafficking, but also introduces you to the resources, partnerships, and ideas that you can take back to your own organizations and communities. With that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. And as I introduce them, I'll be reading their bios, and then when they are introducing themselves and their organizations, they'll talk a little bit more about the work that they do. All right, our first panelist tonight is Renee Cosmedes. I should have clarified that before we met. Okay, hey, I got it. Renee began her career interning for a Maryland community provider while still in college after expressing an interest in the disability field to an advisor. Upon graduation from University of Maryland, she was hired by the same provider in their psychological services department, providing behavior support services. Renee continued working for community providers in various positions, always with a focus on behavior support, quality, and staff training. With a strong interest in advocacy and developing person-centered services, Renee began working as a resource coordinator at Service Coordination, Inc., where she remained for 18 years, serving in various roles within the organization. In 2012, Renee started at Maryland Association of Community Services, MACS, as the Director of Training and Technical Assistance before transitioning to her current position of Vice President of Education and Technical Assistance. While her roles have included working for various organizations, while her roles have included working for various organizations, her career focus has remained grounded and in the interests identified early on: behavior support, advocacy, training, and quality. In her current position, she has the benefit of advocating for systems change, working with community providers to support quality initiatives, training and professional development for staff to ensure people with intellectual and developmental disabilities receive support in the manner and their community of choice. Our next panelist is Kim McKay. Kim McKay is the Assistant Secretary of Programs for the Maryland Department of Disabilities, MDOD, and leads their programs and communications work. Kim has over 25 years of experience in the disability field in a variety of leadership positions, including as Director of Employment for Compass, the first program manager for Project Search. I'm sorry, I messed that up. Kim has over 25 years of experience in the disability field in a variety of leadership positions, including as Director of Employment for Compass, the first program manager for Project Search, Howard and Health Projects Director at the Parents Place of Maryland. She is the president of the Board of Directors for Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education and has served on the boards of the ARC of Howard County and for the Autism Society of Maryland. In 2025, Kim was named the Daily Record's top 100 Maryland women. Kim is a proud University of Maryland Terp with a Master's of Arts in Business with Nonprofit Administration concentration. She lives in Ellicott City with her husband, a pediatrician, and they have 2 grown children, including a son with autism. Our third panelist is Rachel London. Rachel London is the Executive Director of the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council, a statewide public policy and advocacy organization that creates change to make it possible for people with developmental disabilities to live the lives they want with the support that they need. Rachel has been with the council for almost 20 years, serving as the Director of Children, Family Policy, and Deputy Director prior to becoming Executive Director. Rachel earned her bachelor's degree and law degree from the University of Maryland. After law school, she was a staff attorney at Disability Rights Maryland, where she was active in many important civil rights issues for adults with developmental disabilities, including the closure of the Rosewood Center. Our next panelist is Rosa Padilla. Rosa Padilla is a survivor resource specialist at Dawn with a Master of Social Work. She is committed to supporting survivors of domestic and sexual violence through culturally responsive, trauma-informed, and survivor-centered advocacy. Rosa collaborates with survivors to connect them with resources that promote safety, healing, and resilience while advocating for accessible services and accommodations for deaf-blind, and hard-of-hearing survivors. And our fifth and final panelist is Dr. Beth Bowman, who's also one of my favorite people in the world. Dr. Beth Bowman, PhD, LICSW, LCSW-C, is an assistant professor at Gallaudet University in the Department of Social Work. Dr. Bowman earned her doctoral degree from Catholic University in 2020 and her Master of Social Work degree from Gallaudet University in 2009. She holds clinical social work licensure in 4 states and is fluent in American Sign Language, which is utilized for direct clinical practice. She is also a registered yoga teacher and utilizes expressive arts and a holistic approach to well-being and mental health. Dr. Bowman has a specialization in trauma-informed care, earned her advanced clinical trauma certification in 2021. She is a survivor of both CSEC and DMST and founded a nonprofit in the Washington, D.C. area to support survivors of sex trafficking, the Restoring Ivy Collective. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited about tonight and what we are going to talk about. Before we get started, I would like to just have each of our panelists briefly talk to us about your organization, who you serve or work with, and the role you play in supporting Maryland's disability community. Beth, if you'd like to start us off, that would be amazing.
I'm Dr. Bowman. I work at Gallaudet University, working with um, survivors of human trafficking and an intersection of those systems. My contribution to this discussion is related to the research with disability, accessibility, human trafficking services, and how that overlaps with child welfare systems and different systems of care that are involved with human trafficking issues. Also, my experience with, I have been uh, a survivor myself. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very excited to be a part of this discussion tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. I really appreciate it. Renee, if you'd like to go now as well.
Sure. So I work for Maryland Association of Community Services, otherwise called MACS. And for those of us in the disability field, we are a system of acronyms, and it's almost like another language. And so the organization that I work for has a few different roles. We support community providers offering services and supports to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We do advocacy on systemic advocacy, advocacy with the legislature, and we also do professional development, supporting our members to support their staff to provide high quality supports in a manner that is always putting the person first.
Thank you, Renee. I really appreciate that. Rachel, would you like to go next?
Love to. Thank you, Liz. The Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council, which we're going to call the DD Council for short, is a 100% federally funded advocacy organization. We were created in 1971 and have existed in Maryland under a federal law that really guides our work. We play a unique position in the state because we are sort of a quasi-state agency, but we only use our federal funds. And our council, or the board, is primarily people with developmental disabilities and family members. And they are the ones that develop our state plan or strategic plan every 5 years and really guide our work. We do our work in two big ways. We do a lot of advocacy across the lifespan, but we are also a grant funding organization. So my very, very small amount of federal funds supports 4 staff, and about half of the money goes out in grants every year to build the capacity of the community, to do training. We do a lot of leadership development so that people with developmental disabilities and family members are the ones who are the advocates and leaders. And we support the statewide self-advocacy group that is led by and for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. On the advocacy side, I also am the chair of the DD Coalition, and we are 5 statewide organizations, one of which is Renee's organization. And the others are the ARC Maryland, Maryland Disability Law. That's what it used to be called. Disability Rights Maryland. When I used to work there, it was a different name. Disability Rights Maryland and People on the Go, which is the statewide self-advocacy group.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. Rosa, if you'd like to go next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rosa. We are a nonprofit organization for disability services and domestic abuse survivors. So our work here focuses on the state of Maryland. We do a lot of direct services for survivors and creating a safety plan, helping them escape from domestic violence, stalking, domestic violence, sexual violence, teen domestic violence, and various other violence. So we serve deaf and hard of hearing, latent deaf, deafblind. And so that's the population that we generally serve. Yes, we are small, but we are mighty. We don't have a large staff. And I recognize that's a large gap. And so we're working on partnering and building connections with Maryland because we notice that the resources are really hard to provide to those populations, making sure that these folks are being heard, they have the training, that we are teaching folks what, about accessibility. So it's been quite a struggle. Yes, Maryland has the resources. I won't say that it's all bad, but I just feel like this type of work is so important, and I'm very thrilled to be here and doing this work with you all.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rosa. All right, Kim, if you'd like to finish us off, and then we'll move on to our first official question of the night.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me. Kim McKay, Assistant Secretary of Programs at the Maryland Department of Disabilities. Fun fact, as I always start with, Maryland is the only state in the nation with a cabinet level cross-disability policy agency. So that means we are it. We have no direct counterpart in other states, but it does mean that we have a seat at the table with the governor and the cabinet. The voice of people with disabilities does have that voice. It really embodies this saying in the disability community of nothing about us without us. Our legislation requires that the secretary or the deputy secretary of our department has a disability. So it truly is nothing about us without us. I will say also, Rosa, we always say small but mighty staff is almost all comprised of people with disabilities or a close family member with a disability. And so we typically live it and work it all day. We do provide that kind of advocacy internally. We are obviously partners with our state sister agencies, and we work internally to try to make things happen. We are guided by a commission on disabilities that has about 20 members consisting of people with disabilities, advocates, some legislators, and then we have a state disabilities plan as well as the council who has their 5-year plan. We have a 3-year plan that we work on and some other plans too. And I'm sure I'll talk more about our work, but I really appreciate you having us and having me here tonight. So thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kim.
Mm-hmm.
And just because I just realized that I did not further introduce myself, again, I'm Liz Kimball. I'm from Turnaround. I'm the Survivor Initiatives Manager. I've been in the anti-trafficking world for about 15 years. And I have been working with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities about 10 years. So my heart is really attached to this topic and something that I'm passionate about, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you tonight to talk about it. So to kick us off officially, my first question is for Dr. Beth. Many people don't immediately think about the connection between disability and human trafficking. Why is it so important to recognize this intersection?
Thank you so much. Because of vulnerability itself, right? People who have been abused as a children and adults, they are looking for a way. People, adults are looking for ways to exploit people, especially people with disabilities. I mean, there are gaps in services, so folks can't access them to mental health services. Maybe there's a communication breakdown or communication gaps with their family, or they're having issues in school, so with the school system. And so traffickers, people who are exploiting, they see that. And so they're offering this love and this connection or money or whatever they need because these folks are vulnerable. So again, it's the disability, not necessarily the disability, but the system itself that has the gap, that doesn't take care of folks with disabilities. We do know that human traffickers, people who are exploited, um, they're looking for ways to be able to, excuse me, human traffickers are looking for ways to manipulate people, right? Folks with domestic violence, vulnerable communities. And so it really propels the system even further. And so folks within those families don't have a way to communicate with these survivors. So it's easy for the traffickers to see that provide the love or the connection, so to speak, that person, but in reality, they're isolated. The survivors are isolated. And so deaf community, as an example, often, they see or hearing people see deaf people and they're like, oh, okay, maybe I can start signing and then I can exploit them. And so growing up with a family who didn't sign, so for me to not communicate, I didn't have that deep connection. So the traffickers can come in and see that and say, oh, I understand you, let me be there for you. And so I think it's important for the system to disrupt these exploiters to provide services with in the communication space and other types of resources. So yeah, we also know that financially there's a lot of gaps within the disability community. There's not enough money to pay for folks to pay for their rent or to be able to buy food, to obtain their basic needs. And so those survivors can't achieve the services that they need or even access to employment or equal access to employment, so that they can earn enough to support their families, right? And so those kind of vulnerabilities, again, it's not about the disability itself. It's more about the systems are not set up for this population. And again, it's a huge gap in accessibility as well.
Beautiful. Thank you, Beth. Um, Something that you said there about it not being the disability that's the problem, but the systems. And we know as providers that there's already just barely enough resources for everyone, let alone when you break it down into specified communities. So I think that's really important. I think also something you mentioned about how traffickers will learn ASL or they will get involved in something where they have access to vulnerable people. I think we like to think that traffickers are dumb and useless, but in truth, many traffickers are quite intelligent and have strategic thinking around how to get into spaces where vulnerable people will be. So thank you, Beth, for bringing that up. Before we move on, do any of our other panelists have anything they'd like to add? So the connection between disability and human trafficking and why it's so important to recognize this intersection. Yes, Kim.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Dr. Beth said about the accessibility of services, and that's something that our department and Rachel at the DD Council have really worked tremendously hard on, and I will let her talk about part of that when I'm done. But our team has really spent a lot of time working on IT accessibility. One of the things about making state systems accessible to those, in the digital world where everything sort of now has moved to apply for any assistance or get any kind of help. You really have to navigate a digital footprint. And if you can't access a website or you have used a screen reader and it's not accessible for you, it's incredibly challenging. And we recognize that as the state, we have a responsibility to make sure that those systems are better, that our PDFs are accessible, that the documents we're putting out are accessible, that people have the ability to request an interpreter and get it on in real time, whether that's a different language, ASL, a video interpreting service, whatever that is, that we have a responsibility to make that happen for people better. So just wanted to echo that. And then I'm sure Rachel is going to chime in now that I've kind of pushed her to talk about a little plain language stuff.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. Great introduction to that. So one of the things the council has really been focused on in this 5-year state plan, which is actually coming to an end next month, and will continue in the next 5 years, not something we're going to stop, but is the use of plain language, and have been working with a variety of state agencies since the governor signed an executive order to really have the state and their systems not only have IT accessibility, but have language accessibility. And because we know not only is plain language a good thing for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, it's a good thing for everyone. The whole point is that you understand it the first time you read it. It leads to less questions. So it is a proven tool for efficiency. It also makes things easier to translate into a variety of different languages and different ways to have the information. So yes, echo everything, and I can share more about sort of how we've done that and some next steps a little later on. Thanks, Liz.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. And Kim, again, thank you. I love to hear about what the state is doing, because it's always heartwarming to know that the state cares about any of the issues that we all care about. So that's really beautiful. And Rachel, thank you for sharing about the plain language. As someone who comes to the work with not a lot of formal education, I really appreciate when things are in plain language so that I don't have to try to guess. So it's not just for people with disabilities, it's really an accessibility tool for the larger community as well. Awesome. All right, so Renee, we'll get you started on the next question. And that is, what are some of the factors that can increase or reduce vulnerability to abuse for people with disabilities?
Okay. Thank you. So several years ago, there was a shift in the field, and that shift was labeling behavior as a problem to understanding it as a response. And that is something that we learned was called trauma-informed care. And in Maryland, we are so lucky that excuse me, one of the pioneers of this idea of trauma-informed care was from someone who was living and working in our backyard all these years, and her name is Dr. Karen Harvey. She worked for community providers for years, and until recently lived here in Maryland and was very generous with her information and provided education to. She has provided education to thousands of people nationally about this idea of trauma and what it is. And the acronym is TIC, Trauma Informed Care, is that for a long time there was a prevailing assumption that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities were somehow less affected by trauma than the general population, when in fact, um, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities were 7 times more likely to experience sexual abuse, not just any abuse generally, but sexual abuse, and that 1 in 3 adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities encounter some form of sexual abuse in their lifetime. And when I first heard that, I just thought it was startling. And where that idea of trauma comes from is that it starts with abuse and exploitation. That's really the most obvious, but sexual abuse, including peer-to-peer and staff-to-individual abuse in congregate settings, it remains alarmingly common. Physical abuse, bullying, and harassment are also pervasive. Exclusion and marginalization has caused deep wounds on their own. To not be seen, to be heard, or be counted, this is its own form of trauma. And it's one that accumulates over a lifetime. One of the buzzwords in the last few years has been ableism, and in plain language, that is the systemic discrimination against people with disabilities. And it's happened for years. And I can't tell you the countless number of families that I've spoken to that when they said that their son or daughter was diagnosed with a disability at birth or as a young age, the options for treating them became different than what they would have experienced with their other family members. I mean, abuse that was one of the options was not treating. And in any other environment, that would be negligent. But those were many of the options that were presented to families when their family member was identified with an intellectual and developmental disability. There's also been institutional trauma, which is another category that, because institutionalization is less prevalent in our current environment, but I have worked with people that exhibit behaviors such as eating very quickly. And they will, you put food in front of them and they really attack it. And that is an institutional behavior because they were in an environment where if they did not protect, guard, get to their food as quickly as they could, somebody else would. It's a defense mechanism. It was the only way they were going to be able to have their meal. And unfortunately, what that has resulted in over the years is documented issues of people actually choking on their food and having catastrophic results of that institutional behavior. And the last form of trauma is, and perhaps one of the most overlooked sources of vulnerability, is loneliness and isolation. And that is when people don't have meaningful relationships, they're at a far greater risk of exploitation. And that is true for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and all of us. So the real source of vulnerability, it has been reported, is just actual isolation when you boil it down to the most basic terms. So, what what has been commonly accepted in the field of intellectual and developmental disability, sadly, is to assume that somebody has experienced trauma. Um, because the level of support, um, it 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 doesn't change. If somebody hasn't experienced trauma, there isn't a downside to being supported in a trauma-informed way. If somebody has experienced trauma, and oftentimes people are not able to identify the trauma that they've experienced, um, that the trauma-informed approach is a supportive one. It's one that starts with acknowledging the importance of relationships, of creating a safe environment for people. And lastly, that people need to know that their voice is genuinely heard.
Beautiful. Thank you, Renee. I really appreciate all that you spoke on. Um, and what really caught me was the prevalence, and that is only what's reportable. And
Mhm.
as you were saying, treating everyone as though they've gone through something is far easier than assuming they haven't. And I also like that you mentioned that assuming as much does no harm, to
Mhm.
just treat everyone universally as though, because even if they haven't experienced any of the traumas that we're talking about tonight, they have probably experienced some other types. So thank you for that. Would anyone else on the panel like to quickly touch on what factors can increase or reduce vulnerability for people with disabilities? Okay. All right. Um, One important thing I wanted to highlight tonight is that this intersectionality of disabilities and human trafficking can go both ways. So it is glaringly apparent that people with disabilities are at a high vulnerability for being abused and being exploited and trafficked. But disability can also occur as a result of trafficking, a different kind of disabilities. So, what survivors may experience after trafficking can be physical injuries. I like to point out that my feet are rather destroyed from a lot of walking in really unsafe shoes. Um, we can develop traumatic brain injuries, both through physical violence and through PTSD. Because our bodies hold that trauma, we can develop chronic pain disorders. And also, substance use disorders are very prevalent amongst survivors because even with the resources that are there, they're not abundant enough to touch every survivor. And the ones that do get the most amount of help are the ones that we're able to report, and not everyone is able to report. So we just like to kind of bring awareness to that. And it's one of the reasons I'm here. This is one of the things that I'm very passionate about. And I'm really happy that we're having this conversation tonight so that all of us as a community can better understand how these systems do intersect and why this type of collaboration matters. So that takes us into our fourth question, and this one is for Rosa. Once someone is seeking help, what barriers, including language deprivation and communication access, can people with disabilities face, and what does truly accessible survivor-centered care look like?
That's a good question. Up until this point, the survivors, the barriers they face with the system is overwhelming. Sometimes when they need to get a divorce, when they're going through a domestic violence situation, they need counseling and they're not getting appropriate support because we have to think about the privacy that comes along with when you don't have language, when there's language deprivation. Um, so we are there to provide support and advocacy, and the barrier is incredible for these people. For example, core specifically for somebody who has deafblind for human trafficking, um, the battle they have to go through and the mental health barriers they have to go through, these challenges in some areas. We definitely need to improve communication access. Trauma-informed care makes providing advocacy even more important, knowing that we have to support through the person who is experiencing those barriers as well. And without language or without uh, the visual part, they're doubling the barrier they're experiencing. And for somebody who is deaf blind, communication needs are different. If they're able to get their communication needs, that's ideal. But it takes time with practice. We have to educate, and this doesn't happen overnight. We have to keep going and keep working in this area, especially for those who are deaf blind. We have to make sure that we're printing in large font, and disability happens on a spectrum. Something that might be effective for one person might not be what's working for another person. So for deaf or deaf-blind, their needs are on a spectrum. For some people, they need assistive technology or they need a magnifier. So it's not one type of technology that fits all. So what access looks like also is different for everyone. Don't make assumptions. Make sure that you're not making decisions for the person who needs support and allow them to have self-advocacy and make those decisions for themselves as to what they're needing.
Thank you, Rosa. That was a really beautiful answer to that question. And it occurred to me throughout what you were saying that not only do people have specialized needs, but oftentimes even with interpretation services, they're still not specialized enough. So providers who don't typically work with people with disabilities may think, oh, I can just call any ASL interpreter to come and deal with this. And in reality, it's not that simple. So on top of the barriers they already face, the systems and the so-called solutions don't often fit what they need at all. So thank you for bringing that up. Would anybody else like to take this question? And again, it's when someone is seeking help, which barriers, including language deprivation and communication access, can people with disabilities face, and what does truly accessible survivor-centered care look like? Yes, Rachel. Oh, I'm
Thank you.
sorry. Which one? Oh, I saw Rachel's hand first, so I'll kick it off to you and then off to Beth.
Okay, I'll be brief because I also just want to raise the fact, Liz, you just talked about too, the people who don't or can't seek help or assistance. And in the IDD world, so people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, trying not to use acronyms, one of the things we talk about a lot is the group of people who are non-speaking. And may or may not use or even have access to, as Rosa just said, the assistive technology, but how behavior is communication, and making sure that we're listening to that too. Sometimes before we can even get to any assistive technology or communication device or anything like that, making sure we're listening to that person's behavior and as communication.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rachel. Beth, would you like to add to that as well?
Certainly. What I think is really important for this type of work and any population, vulnerable population, when we're talking about trauma-informed care, right? One key concept, I think, is empowerment. I think that's very critical. You can ask a person, what their preferences are for accessibility or for an accommodation, and it won't look the same for everyone, right? Just because my diagnosis is this doesn't mean that whatever fits me and my experiences will look the same for others. And so when we talk about human trafficking survivors, we're not talking about one person. It's not a monolith, right? It's not homogenous. It's not a homogenous group. There's a different makeup. My background, my culture, my language use. Um, I know Rosa also mentioned language deprivation, right? That you can't just provide any type of interpreter. So we're talking about people with different language needs and experiences. And so language deprivation is also key for someone gesturing to this to folks who have been language deprived. And again, just knowing how to ask the right things while making your assessment and working with this population. The individuals who are working with them, they may not know everything. And so, again, we're talking about cultural competency. I think the goal is more cultural humility, where we know how to respond to these folks, right, and their needs. And that one person won't know everything about the person who is the survivor, about their culture. So it's important to ask the appropriate type of questions to make sure that you're getting the type of responses that you're looking for. And so empowerment, I think, is indeed key. And I'd like to underscore that so that we are having a more trauma-informed approach.
Yes, thank you, Beth. I think that it goes back to that idea that just because someone offers a thing, a service, whatever that is, doesn't necessarily make them the correct person for that space or that person. Would any of our other panelists like to touch on this real quick before we move on? All right. Kim, the next question is for you. Can you tell us about the different areas the Maryland Department of Disabilities works in and some of the initiatives underway to make Maryland more accessible and inclusive? And I know you touched on them a little bit already, but I'd love to hear more.
Sure. Well, I sell us as a policy agency, and we certainly spend a ton of time in that space and have a lot of different policy directors. We're sort of organized by area, so transportation, health, employment, those kinds of things. We do have a number of programs and services that we offer to make Maryland more inclusive. Um, One we sort of touched on was the IT accessibility work and all the work that that team is doing to make our website and everybody else's accessible. But one of the others that I wanted to mention was our technology assistance program, or TAP as we call it, MD TAP. They're sort of like a assistive technology lending library. So they can lend out devices to you, apps, devices, anything. And I'm talking about from the most low tech thing to the highest tech stuff to try in your home, in work, in wherever, to make your life easier, to make you more independent in life as a person with a disability. And so that lending program, we also have a financial loan program that goes along with that. So if those assistive technology devices that you are interested in cost a whole lot of money, we have a accessible AT loan program that is very low cost, very easy to get the loan because we recognize that people have a lot of times a lot of additional medical bills and so might not qualify for loans in a traditional kind of way. So this is an underwritten program so that you sort of the loans are guaranteed, which is super helpful for lots of folks. And we also have a high-tech reuse exchange program where someone might have some equipment that they no longer need. We take it in, clean it, make sure it's working effectively, and can get it back out to someone who does need that kind of device. So that's a really innovative kind of thing. We also have the Attendant Care Plus program, and our Attendant Care program allows for obviously someone to, it's a reimbursable program to have an assistant come into their home that they hire, that they self-direct. So they employ this person, they pick who that is to help them do whatever tasks there are. And then we offer reimbursement on a sliding scale based on income. But that we, in the last year, this was 2 years ago, passed some legislation to make it the plus part of attendant care. So you can also get reimbursement for things that might make your life easier, maybe delivery fees. Maybe you have um, difficulty getting out to the store, whether that's because of a physical disability or some sort of mental health. So, we can pay for delivery fees for certain things and some other ways that however it is to make you more independent and access the world. So we have a couple of those programs. I do want to mention that we also have what I think is probably super critical, a constituent services program that's led by our incredible employee, Nan Brittingham, who has worked for the state for, I can't believe I'm going to say this, like 45 years. So she knows literally everybody, everywhere, all the time, I say. So if you have, it's kind of like that, I don't even know where to start kind of question. She can help guide folks through the maze of things that is available in the state. The state has a massive amounts of resources, and I could talk for probably the entire 90 minutes, even about our programs in our small but mighty office. Um, and then we could do webinars all day long for probably a month about all the things at the Department of Health and all the things at Department of Labor and all the things at each of one of these nuanced departments that have all these things available. But our constituent services can really help guide folks to what's a state program, what's a federal program, how can you get the things that you need. So that's really, I think, a critical thing for folks is even knowing where to start. So yes, it has to be accessible, but you have to even know where to start asking the questions to get to the services that you need. And I think that's really probably one of those critical things as well.
Thank you, Kim. It warms my heart as a Maryland girl through and through to hear what the state is doing. And turnaround, where I'm coming from to you guys tonight, has been around for 47 years. And so often I hear, oh, I didn't know you guys existed. And we have to tell them, like, you only know about what you know about. Like, if
Yep.
you don't know the person, you don't know the right person, you don't have the right email, whatever it is, it's a barrier to knowing what's out there. So thank you for highlighting that. And if you want to do webinars about any of that, let us know. We will come and attend those.
Love it.
Rachel, I'm going to move on to our last question for individual panelists, and then our last question will be for everyone. But for Rachel, Maryland is home to so many diverse communities, each with unique strengths, needs, and culture. What does an accessible and inclusive community look like, and what can we do to help build one?
It's a great question. And I could talk for, more than 90 minutes just about that. But I think I want to focus on two things, sort of both of which Dr. Beth touched on. And the first being, when you've met one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. And I think that is really true also about the communities in Maryland, right? One community is not the same as another community, and they don't have the same needs or the same idea of inclusion, and the difference between the rural areas of Maryland, the urban areas, and everything in between. And what we have found, this is not a new thing, but most recently in our work with the Department of Disability is on inclusive playgrounds, and developing a toolkit to help have more in Maryland, is really, you have to go to the community first. And you have to involve the people in the community to know what they need and what they want to be truly inclusive and accessible for all of their community members. And the main premise of that being nothing about us without us, and empowering and partnering with people with disabilities and family members to make all of those things happen, right? Because inclusion starts everywhere and it shouldn't ever end. Um, and what we're seeing, thankfully, I've been doing this 25 years too, it goes in waves. And sometimes it's generational, and sometimes it is just based on where you are in Maryland or in another state. And when you bring people in the community together, it is the most powerful. And when you bring the people together and ensure that it includes people with disabilities and their family members, and their allies, but making sure that the people that that all of the people in that community, and making sure all really means all. A lot of my colleagues get tired of me saying this, but one of the things is all doesn't mean all yet, right? So until it does, we have to be explicit about all of the things that we mean when we say all. And I think we've talked about plain language, and that is not just for people with disabilities. It really does help the entire community. And it helps all the service providers too, right? When people understand what they may be getting or want to be getting the first time, then you can get to the meat of the resources. I know we're running short on time, so I'll leave it at that for now.
No, thank you. That was beautiful. And when you said all doesn't mean all, it made me think all means easy. It means the easiest people to serve. They're the most, cooperative. And so that's just the people that know about the resources, have been referred to the resources, and then are easy to work with. So there is definitely a large group of human beings who are being left out. But thank you for all of that information. And that will move us into our closing question. So one by one, if each of our panelists can provide an answer to the following question, that would be great. We've talked about vulnerability, accessibility, and inclusion throughout today's conversation. As we wrap up, what gives you hope, and where do you see the greatest opportunity to build more accessible and inclusive communities across Maryland? Kim, would you like to kick us off on that one?
I sure will. I Because we work so closely with our sister state agencies, I am always heartened by the fact that when we reach out to an agency about an issue or something that's coming up, every response that we get is, we didn't realize we were doing that way. We didn't realize we were leaving people behind. How can we do better? And what gives me hope is communities like this panelist, this group together, all of these people that have logged on tonight to hear about what's out there and what's happening and how we can make things better for folks. And that in these times, well, I need the hope where I can find it. And that is the hope, is that when we go and say, hey, your website isn't accessible for people with disabilities who use screen readers. Oh my gosh, how do we fix that? Oh my gosh, I'm making PDFs that people can't read. Teach me how to do it better. And so the fact that people are open and sometimes just don't know what they don't know, right? The same thing about where do you get the resources? People don't know the barriers that they inadvertently are throwing up. And so I think that the more we can have these conversations with all of our sister agencies about things that they could be doing better, is really great.
Thank you, Kim. I think that's beautiful. Yeah, knowing that people are ready and willing to make changes to make everybody's life a little easier is always a beautiful gift. Rosa, would you like to add anything about what gives you hope and where you see the greatest opportunity to build more accessible and inclusive communities across Maryland?
Yeah, for me, the goal is to have community education training. And there have been some organizations who have reached out during the summer to make things better for themselves. So that's a moving goal, and that's definitely the goal overall. I think we have a bright future ahead of us for those who are deaf, blind, various disabilities. And to have that community goal to work together really makes everything better. Like Kim said, to have this network, have this panel, we're all working in collaboration. That helps a lot.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rosa. And yeah, I love what was said about those who showed up, whether you came to learn about human trafficking, disabilities, or the intersection of them both. You guys showing up is proof that the work that we're all doing is working in some degree. So thank you for providing us hope. Rachel, would you like to take that question?
Thanks. I think what gives me the biggest amount of hope is that people with disabilities and their families and advocates and all the community partners are showing up and they're speaking up and they're sharing their experiences and they are creating change. Um, and every time it happens, there's an increase in the way people look at inclusion, not just as, a goal, but as something we all want and a responsibility we all share. I do think that there's an opportunity in sort of what I said before and being explicit about making sure people with disabilities are at the table. They're there when decisions are being made. Um, and as we do that more and more, we're going to move the conversation beyond access and services, and be able to focus on true belonging, and truly creating a Maryland where everyone lives and all of the things that that means together.
Thank you. That was beautiful, Rachel. Renee, would you like to add what brings you hope and where you see opportunity to build more?
I would love to. So, in regard to the trauma, I one of the things that gives me hope is that um, healing is possible from trauma. People who have survived significant trauma often develop deep wells of empathy and compassion. They become exceptional friends, fierce advocates, and powerful peer supporters. So I when we're talking about something as heavy as trauma, I always want to end with there is hope for healing and there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. Um, Piggybacking on what Rachel was saying, the when I think about when I first started in this field many years ago, um, compared to what it looks like now, the through the years of advocacy and people finding their voice and many efforts on the part of families, slowly, and sometimes it seems way too slow, but the bar, it has been raised, and the kinds of issues that I think about we were looking at 30 years ago, um, because of those many efforts, there is a lot of hope. And one of the things that I really love is that the expectations of families for students that are exiting the education system and going into adult services, it is vastly different now than what it was 30 years ago, because those students that have been coming up through the education system, they have been fully included in their community, in their families, and the expectations of those family members for what the future of those students becoming adults is. it is very different than it was 30 years ago. And um, so when I think about, it seems like we are pushing and pulling and trying so hard. Um, and it doesn't seem like it's making that much of a difference. Looking back those years, there is a tremendous difference in the services and supports, and what we are doing now and looking towards the future to do even more of.
Oh, that's a beautiful piece of hope. Thank you for sharing that. And I think the same can be said for those of us who've been in the anti-trafficking world for a while. We've seen shifts and changes in policy and just a general community response to the outreach that we've all been tirelessly doing for so long. To close us out of that question, Dr. Beth, would you like to name any hope that you have and any opportunities you have to build more accessible and inclusive communities?
Sure, thank you. For me, when I think about experiencing human trafficking from the age of 13 to 17, the support and resources weren't there. Things were just getting built. And between 1997 on to in the 2000s, 2004, that was during the time of my exploitation experience with domestic violence and human trafficking services. Um, a lot of crime happened during that period. I did not learn about human trafficking. I didn't know about my own exploited experience as a child. I learned later on during a job, identifying somebody else who experienced human trafficking and the different list of how you classify or identify the characteristics from a job training. And then I look and reflected back on my own experience and I was able to identify that. But I honestly had some really mixed feelings about how that list of identifiers apply to me because my experience compared to different clients I've worked with are different. Their experiences over the course of years I've worked are different than mine. So this meeting really, makes me think about for back in the days, we should have started out maybe small, providing some sort of basic level 101 training as foundation, and just having an understanding for human trafficking and what that represents. I wish I had that experiencing. I wish I had that training. I wish I had understanding of trauma-informed care, and when that was like, um, and how I could have sought help maybe by going to the hospital or seeing a professional provider. But back then, there weren't enough resources. And so today, having these discussions about the intersectionality with disability services and human trafficking services and the vulnerability that comes with that, how to care for different people with disabilities and the different isms or the different deprivations that they experience, and what gaps still exist and what type of education is needed to bridge those gaps and create partnerships in order to know how we can serve the communities better and collaborating with those human trafficking agencies. That's really, it should be a priority and a focus. So my hope is for these things to continue to happen, for these dialogues to happen, for conversations like this to happen. And it's really, it gives me hope to see that it is happening, but I'm still living my life today. I don't look back and think, who is Beth back then and Beth now. So to think about trauma-informed care, I mean, some of the stories that I hear from other people, they're truly horrifying. But to be able to identify different vulnerabilities in various populations, we need to be able to understand how to serve them better. And yeah, that does give me hope I feel really hopeful from this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And I I was thinking about one of the many walks we went on years ago when we were building the Restoring Ivy Collective, and how much we talked about survivor centeredness and survivor focus and having survivors at the table. And to answer the question myself, I have hope in where survivor leadership is headed. I probably wouldn't still be around if I didn't have hope. But doing the work that Dr. Beth and I have done as survivor leaders and knowing what we needed when we were being trafficked or after we've been trafficked, and being able to provide that for other survivors through the work that we've done is an incredible testament to the hope that I have. I think where I want to see more work being done is having more survivors included in these conversations. Because, like we've talked about all night, one survivor's experience does not lend to every, any more than one ally's experience can lend to everyone. And so I'm excited and hopeful to see more and more representation within the survivor leader community. But having worked in this field for this long, it is a beautiful thing to see where we've come, and it gives me great hope to see where we're going. And with that, my friends, is the end of our our questions for our panel. We have